my cousins came down from New York. You know, we hanging out and we play that joint, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool," but they got new stuff out. And they're like, "Yeah, they got a joint called Mr. Telephone Man out."
So don't cry, mama, your baby boy is here. Go ahead, lean on my shoulders, I'll wipe away the tears. Know you're hurting inside, and the pain is deep. I'm here to answer your call, the cry of the streets.
Yo, what up, what up? It's your boy Alias. Today we going with the name Lil Rock. I will get into that in just a few. But welcome to episode 2 of the Alphamist. This podcast is about helping to build virtuous kings and queens in body, mind, spirit, and home. All right. We do this by discussing important topics of the day and using universal wisdom to explore those ideas in a transformational way to help you grow. Today, we're going to be talking about how to not simply be a product of your environment. In other words, how do you transcend your upbringing? Obviously, our environments kind of shape who we are and who we become and how we identify ourselves. There's benefits and pros to that, and likewise, there could be some cons to that. So we're going to kind of chop that up and see how you leverage and utilize that to your advantage. All right. But first, Lil Rock. All right. So this name comes from when I was a kid. My brother, my cousins kind of teased me, said I had a big forehead. So because of that, my name being Latif, they took that and made it LaFour. They made it Lil Rock. So that was one of the little names they teased me by. Ironically, Lil Rock actually ended up becoming kind of a cool nickname. And the reason for that is, again, I was born in the South Bronx. But one of the pioneer first MCs is Coke Lil Rock from the South Bronx. Used to roll with DJ Kool Herc. All right. A few years down the road, you get T Lil Rock. All right. Very famous song called It's Yours. That song influenced Wu-Tang's version, which came much years later. Their It's Yours song, but T Lil Rock. And then probably the most famous Lil Rock was Scott Lil Rock from Boogie Down Productions with KRS-One. So there you have it, 3 different Lil Rocks. So I kind of embraced that name Lil Rock. It works just fine for me. And the ironic twist, that's a cool name. All right, so that's the meaning behind that name, that alias there.
I'm the master of my fate, I'm the captain of my soul.
So as we do with every episode, we start off our first segment with The Sphinx Speaks, and that is a little history of today. Today being September 8th. The Sphinx Speaks is our show's icebreaker, where we share a few pertinent tidbits of history from global news, politics, pop culture, and my favorite hip hop. All right, so let's take it all the way back to 1565. In 1565, on September 8th, St. Augustine, Florida, was the first permanent European settlement in the U.S. and was founded by the Spanish. If you've never been to St. Augustine, cool little town. I do live in Florida now, in Jacksonville, so I'm not too far from St. Augustine. Nice little place to hang out and visit if you've never done so. All right. Fast forward to 1664 in New Amsterdam. It surrendered to the English and was renamed to, guess what? New York. So those of you from New York, live in New York, visited New York, its original name was New Amsterdam. That change happened on September 8th, 1664. All right, let's take it to 1900. A devastating hurricane struck Galveston, Texas, killing thousands and remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. I did spend some time in Galveston, Texas. Was able to take a little cruise out of Galveston, Texas. Me and the missus hit up Mexico, some other nice spots. But shout outs to Galveston, Texas. All right. In 1943, General Dwight Eisenhower publicly announced Italy's surrender to the Allies, which ended that fascist government regime there in 1943 on this day. 1945, Korea was divided into the U.S.-controlled South, making it South Korea, and the North was controlled by Soviet. So that split still remains to this day, South and North Korea, but that began on September 8th, 1945. All right, got to know this history, guys. 1986, Oprah Winfrey Show began its national syndication on this day in 1986, September 8th. Also, switch it up to hip hop. Cannabis released his debut album, Can I Bust, September 8th, 1998. A lot of people still consider him a very talented MC, one of the best that may have done it. Of course, his career was somewhat prematurely ended. Had a very famous battle or beef with LL Cool J, something about a microphone on his arm. Most of you kind of know that story already, but Cannabis dropped his debut album on this day, September 8th in 1986. Also in hip-hop, Jay-Z released his 11th studio album, The Blueprint 3. Very good album, like that one, September 8th of 2009. And last but not least, 2016, California and federal regulators fined Wells Fargo $185 million for employees illegally opening millions of unauthorized customer accounts. You know, I was actually a licensed financial advisor during that time. I worked for a competitor. I won't bother saying their name. But yeah, that shook up the industry quite a bit when that came out. I will say not just in the investment world, but I've seen other companies. My background has been a lot of sales, but I've seen shady things go down in a lot of companies. Oftentimes you have the top executives who kind of turn a blind eye and let these things go on because it's bringing money in for the company. And then when it kind of hits the public eye and the media, then all of a sudden they try to clean things up, you know, fire some people on the bottom. Meanwhile, these executives get to oftentimes walk away with their millions of dollars in bonuses. Maybe they do a little congressional hearing or something, get slapped on the wrist. But, you know, I consider it to be very unfair and greedy aspect of capitalism. Kind of comes along with the territory. Unfortunately, this is why we do need federal regulations to kind of keep these things in check in the proper government agencies. But that happened in 2016 on this day, September 8th. So what do we take from all of this? History whispers, but only if you are listening. We have to know where we came from and our past in order to know where we're going. So that's history of today. The Sphinx speaks. All right, here in segment 2, Fool's Gold is when we discuss a common belief, perception, or limiting idea that restricts us from growing or becoming the best version of ourselves. This fool's gold can be very tempting and oftentimes builds our ego. We must understand our egos, the things we identify with, and our sense of pride sometimes may serve us in life, careers, or whatever. But these same identifications is also what can restrict us from growing. The traits and characteristics we assume are meant to serve us and not the other way around, where we become slaves to our attachments and identifications. So some of y'all got to chill. It's cool to represent where you come from. It's cool to embrace your culture, whether you're from the South, the North, the country, the West, whatever it is. You know, when we're born into this world, we're all impressionable. We're all blank canvases. We tend to absorb or emulate a lot of the characteristics and behaviors that we're exposed to. But we have to be mindful that at some point in time, consciously or unconsciously, we made choices to embrace certain traits that shape us and who we become. But also, we could always evolve to grow and start to recognize when those traits are no longer serving us or limiting us from becoming our best version. So that's what this episode is going to be about. We're going to do a little more deep dive into these things and really break this down. So today's Fool's Gold is believing that where you are from and how you were raised is the best and perhaps only way. Some people really take it that far. All right. So share a little story of myself. Born in the South Bronx, moved to Miami as a young age, but born and raised between those two cities. And that shaped me in a number of ways. So one, again, I say there are pros and cons to every place on this planet, ultimately. The pros of the South Bronx, literally got to see the birth of hip hop. So I'm mentioning these names, you know, DJ Herc, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa, Melly Mel, KRS-One, Fat Joe, all these dudes are from around my way. Got to see these dudes, certainly set an impression upon me. My love for hip hop just runs through the family, from my brother to my cousins. You know, I had cousins that actually used to carry crates for, you know, some of those pioneering DJs. So hip hop runs through our blood. I feel like I've always had a deeper insight into hip hop than the average person, because when you talk about the South Bronx, unlike a lot of other boroughs or cities, you know, those people have people to influence them and developing their sound, the South Bronx essentially was getting it from the dirt. We got to keep in mind that back in those days, there was no thing called hip hop. It was really the influence of, funk music and R&B sounds. They really took a liking to the breakbeat parts of it. But, hip hop, I like to say the 5 elements of it. Some people say 4, but I look at the DJ, I look at the MC, I look at the art, the graffiti of it. I look at the dancing, which of course was breakdancing initially, and then I look at the fashion. So all of these elements were essentially separate entities, but they all combined to become what we call hip hop to this day. And of course, hip hop does evolve, but all of this to say the South Bronx afforded me a front row seat to really see the birth of this thing that is now a global phenomenon, and that was very impressionable for me and kind of inspired me to figure out and know that I could achieve big things. I could be an entrepreneur and find ways to, express myself creatively and artistically. The cons of growing up in the South Bronx. Yes, talking about the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of crime. The South Bronx essentially was almost a third world country, burned down, abandoned buildings, empty lots, not a lot of jobs, a lot of, crime, poverty, witnessed the crack epidemic, family members using it, friends using it, people selling it. So it was kind of the Wild Wild West in a lot of ways. But even with negative attributes of our environment, if you're making the right choices, it can shape you in certain ways that you can rise above and transcend that. So if I compare and contrast that to Miami, back in those days, Miami was a lot more suburbish. I lived all over Miami, Cutler Ridge, North Miami, Carroll City, Liberty City, Miami Shores. Did I say that? So really all over Miami. At the time, again, a lot slower, a lot more suburbish. So I feel like I had the benefit of seeing 2 different worlds, what the hood, the projects was like in the South Bronx, but also how, lower middle class people were living in Miami at the time. The con, I remember walking through places like Cutler Ridge and having some, boys walk down or ride down the street and pick up trucks and screaming out, calling you the N-word. So that was one of the cons. So again, pros and cons to every environment. You have to learn to take what you can, the positives from it, even the negatives, and use those as a stepping stool to grow yourself, to evolve, become a better version of yourself. But these are the ways that our environments mold, influence, and shape us to become who we are. Some people succumb to their environments and they get sucked into it, and not for the better. Others stay in those environments and they never really get exposure to see anything outside of those environments, while others are able to escape those environments, some to never return, some remember where they came from and go back to those places, try and help those out. So this is the essence of, how we are influenced by our environments and oftentimes become products of our environment.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
All right, the Crucible of Earth. Everything in life has pros and cons. When it comes to the Crucible of Earth, we're talking about our foundations. The earth represents strength, firmament, and that is which is stabilizing. But likewise, this inertia can make it difficult for us to change. As much as it may serve us, it can also hinder us. When it comes to not succumbing and becoming, simply a product of our environment, these are the things we got to keep in mind. The problem is when we become too rigid, when we become overly identified with our narrative and we don't explore and get exposure to other cultures and communities. I, for one, think it is essential for people to get outside your own community. I'll tell you a story. My pops moved to Atlanta, late 80s. He took a job with Caterpillar, which is, the construction company, and they were based on the west side of Atlanta, Austell, Georgia. So you could literally see Atlanta from Austell if you're standing there on I-20. But he had coworkers who were born and raised there in Austell who had never been to Atlanta. And he was in disbelief. He's like, hold up. What do you mean you never been to Atlanta? You can literally see it from here. And those people are like, well, we have no reason to go down there. And this is mind blowing. You're talking to a New Yorker who, probably been all over Queens, Brooklyn, Harlem, upstate New York, Long Island. In New York, you tend to grow up fast and you get exposed to a lot of things. You got subways, you got cabs, you had, local transportation. So it was just part of our upbringing to venture out a lot. And so you're contrasting that to Austell, Georgia, outside of Atlanta, where you got people who have no interest in going to see the downtown city. I'm like, not even for once, just to kind of, get a better understanding. They have no interest. So again, that can be a negative aspect. And Austell's a good place. Don't twist my words. But to box yourself in, and the same remains true for New York. I spent 10 years in the Navy. When I got out, I moved back to New York City, stayed with my grandmother for a while, South Bronx. I ran into friends I'd seen, grew up with since elementary school. Give them dap, what's up? Let's do something this weekend. No doubt, let's do it. I had a job, so I'm getting up in the morning, going to work. A lot of dudes that grew up in the projects never really left the projects. They kind of on opposite timetables. So I'm getting up, going to work in the morning. They going upstairs, to go to bed because they've been up all night on the park benches, on the stoops, talking shit, whatever case may be. I come home in the evening, they basically coming back downstairs. So we're like, they're like night owls. Because of the military and just having a structure for a number of years, was on a very different schedule. Nonetheless, these my peoples, grew up with them, we're close. Friday come, I'm like, hey, let's go hit up downtown, let's go Times Square, let's do whatever. And a lot of them were like, what you want to go down there for? I'm like, what do you mean? It's Times Square. It's like the largest city in the U.S. But they want to stay right there on the block. They want to go to the local bar up the street. And I quickly realized, our minds, our head spaces are just two different spaces. I wanted to get out, see more things, and they just chose not to. Not say they've never been downtown, but their world was really confined to this small environment. So whether you're in the South Bronx, whether you're in Austell, Georgia, a lot of people will box themselves in to the area that they grow up in. Maybe it's because it's a comfort zone and they just, hesitant to want to step outside those worlds. But I implore you and say it's very important for you to get exposure, not just to places outside of where you grow up, but other ethnicities, other demographics, other ways of living, because the more exposure you get, one, you're going to appreciate where you come from and the good things of that, but you're also going to possibly learn some other ways of life, some other types of food, some other, hobbies to do. And that always just enriches you and makes you a better version of yourself. All right. Me personally, I never really became overly identified with my environment, and I never really totally became simply a product of my environment. Now I'll elaborate on that. So as I mentioned, born in the Bronx, early age, moved to Miami, but I went back and forth. My parents, my grandparents had some roots in Miami, Florida. My mother, born in Miami, but raised in New York. My pops, born and raised in the South Bronx. So we always had connections between these two cities. A lot of people to this day call snowbirds, own homes in New York, go down to Florida for, the South when the winter's too cold. So for me, I was always kind of the kid outside the bubble somewhat. So in Miami, I was kind of seen as the New York dude, always ahead of time with the graffiti and the hip hop songs. And I remember this one time, 4th grade, I just came back from New York down to Miami, going to school, Miami Shores Elementary, and we're at the table. People call it different things in different places. You may call it Jonses, you may call it, the dozens. In South Bronx at the time, we called it snapping. So snapping is making jokes of your friends and people in your group, your circle around you. So you can talk about someone's looks, their hair, their clothes, whatever it may be. So again, we're in the cafeteria, elementary school, and dudes started cracking jokes. So I'm like, oh, you snapping like that? And I remember vividly, the table just got quiet. And I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, why everybody got quiet all of a sudden? And someone looked at me and said, what does that mean? And I realized oh, they hadn't heard this word before. And I'm not taking credit that I introduced the word snapping to Miami, but certainly in my circle, at least in this school, this part of Miami, they had never heard this word before. So for the first time I'm hearing it, they didn't know how to react because they didn't even know what it meant. So I had to obviously explain what it meant. And, things went on business as usual. But again, this just shows the difference of two different places, two different cultures, language, slang, and how, we become products of our environment, our dialect, all these other things. So I'll pause that story right there. But again, that gives you an idea of just the geography of where we grow up, city versus suburban life, and how these things impact and shape us.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
The forging of water. The forging of water is about movement and that which is fluid. It is about the things that come into our lives that influence and shape us. It is about our nurturing and emotional intelligence. So again, when it comes to being a product of our environment, it's not just the land or the geography itself, it's the people and experiences as well. I'll share this other story. So in Miami, my cousins from New York came down to visit one time. I was probably maybe 7th grade or so. New Edition was one of the hot groups out at the time. They were still very new. A lot of people thought Ralph Tresvant's voice sounded a lot like Michael Jackson. So they kind of, a young Michael Jackson at the time. So they were hot. They combined the R&B with the hip hop. So in Miami, we were still rocking the, Candy Girl joint. My cousins came down from New York. We hanging out and we play that joint. And they're like, oh, that's cool. But they got new stuff out. And they're like, yeah, they got a joint called Mr. Telephone Man out. And we had that same dumbfounded look like, really? So, back in those days, music traveled differently. You had to have records, you had to have cassette tapes, whatever. But things that may have happened in New York and already been out for a while, maybe didn't reach Miami to maybe a year later or so. Just depends. So again, while we enjoying one thing, they had already moved past that, beyond that, onto something else. So that's something that always stuck with me. Just the time lapse between New York City and Miami at the time. Of course, things have changed. Times have changed. The world's a lot smaller now. We got social media. We got, streaming. We got all these other things. So when something drops, people have the potential now for things to go worldwide, overnight, especially if you already got a big established name. You drop something, the whole world probably knows about it within 24 hours. So times are very different now, but back then there was significant time difference, time lapse. Again, the point of that is showing how culture, music, language, all these things influence us and shape us, and even the timing of when things we get exposed to impact us. So again, that was just another example of things in New York happened a lot faster pace. New York was always kind of the mecca for hip hop, music, and a lot of cultural things. And then it kind of dispersed out across the nation. Of course, new cities and different states start developing their own sound, their own culture, and their own identity. And it's all good.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
The fire of the Sphinx. They say the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. The fire of the Phoenix is about change. It's about transformation. It's about burning up the old to make room for the new. When it comes to transcending our upbringing, we have to understand how some aspects of our story or narrative serve us, but also life may present us with challenges where our identity with our foundation no longer serves us. Me, for example, I left New York City at the age of 16. My parents separated or divorced really the summer after my junior year of high school. So that summer I had a lot of freedom. My pops was trying to go back to Miami. Things didn't work out there. He ended up in Atlanta, Georgia with one of my aunts. My mom's wanted me to stay in New York. We were upstate New York at the time. She was going back down to the Bronx. And while I was tempted to do that, again, that summer I had a lot of freedom. So, I did a lot of firsts, which I won't go into great detail right now, but basically making some choices and decisions that were starting to send me down the wrong path, the wrong road, but having a lot of fun in the process of it. But something inside of me always kind of knew, like, if I stay down this road, things are probably not going to work out well. Either end up in jail or end up, dead in a coffin. And as much fun as I was having, something inside of me kind of had, the awareness, the consciousness to say, if I don't switch it up, this, and no telling where this may go. So I made the mature decision to leave my friends, leave, the girls I was messing with at the time, to go down to Atlanta, basically start over fresh and new. I did get my last year of high school done, got my diploma. In fact, most of my friends I was hanging out with at the time did not graduate high school, did not get GEDs. So I kind of feel like, I made perhaps the right decision. That said, the schools I went to, they didn't really push SATs. They didn't really push going to college. I don't think I even took the SAT in high school. Probably was smart enough to go to college, didn't have the financial means, didn't have the background or history to even know what it was like going through that application process, where to live, go to dorms, all that stuff was foreign to me. My pops had me at the age of 19. So when I'm 16, 17, he's only 35, 36 himself. So a newly young divorced man in Atlanta. Atlanta's always had women. So here he is living his best life. And so he kind of helped nudge me into the Navy. So I joined the Navy at 17, 2 weeks out of high school, and was kind of thrust into some leadership positions. I was the master at arms at boot camps. That's kind of like the second in charge. You got the RCPO, which is the recruit chief petty officer. Master at arms is kind of the second in command. So here I am, 17-year-old, for the first time learning about leading people and being a manager and giving orders or instructions and delegating all these other things. Guys older than me, some in their early 20s, just kind of figuring it out. That said, at the time, I had a pretty strong, probably New York accent, spoke kind of fast, and you realize everyone can't really understand you. So I don't know how fully aware I was of it at the time, but I realized I had to kind of start changing up my pace, changing up my tonality, my voice, my slang, so that people could understand me better, because in those leadership roles, you tend to do a lot more speaking and talking. And obviously you want people to understand you. You don't have to keep repeating yourself multiple times. So that for me became probably the catalyst, the first shift of making conscious choices that now I'm in a new environment and I have to adapt to my new environment in order to be successful. Because if I stayed in my ways, which is I'm not switching up my speech, I ain't switching up my style, I ain't switching up my hand gestures, my theatrics, that will probably have limited me from growing in that position. And furthermore, ultimately becoming a naval officer, going through, naval officer school, training, college, all these other things. And so again, the point of all of this is at some point in time, most of us are going to reach crossroads, bridges where we have to shed something from our old self, our old past, in order to blossom or grow into a new version of ourselves. All right. This isn't about being fake. This ain't about trying to be something you're not. You can remain true to who you are and where you come from. You just learn to adapt to your environment, almost like a chameleon. Another way I'll share the story is a good friend of mine from the Virgin Islands. And ironically enough, this guy I've known for 30 something years now, my ex-wife at the time, saw him walking across a base in San Diego, California. And so my ex is from St. Croix, Virgin Islands as well. So she sees a guy, she's like, I think I know him. Now, this guy's in a full Navy uniform with a, Dixie cap on and whatnot. And so I'm like, yeah, right. We think you know this dude. We in San Diego, California. You think you know him all the way from the Virgin Islands. She's like, yeah, I think I do know him. When you see him, ask him where he's from. So I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. So next time I run across him, I do ask him, like, yo, man, my lady thinks she know you. Where you from? So he's like, yeah, from Virgin Islands. Like, what? So sure enough, she was right. So me and him, kicked it, chatted. He told me some stories. He didn't really know her family so much. She was one of 10. She had some brothers, but he kind of loosely knew of them. Long story short, he and I ended up becoming best friends, known each other for 30 years now, went to the same college, pledged the same fraternity, went through a very similar, military officer program, best man at my wedding. So we've definitely been friends over the years. But just that chance encounter led to that relationship. But I bring him up to say he's a guy who can turn his accent on and off. When he's on the phone with his family or peoples, strong Caribbean, Virgin Island accent. When he's in uniform or doing stuff in the military, the Navy, he can turn it off. Just straight, whatever, English American accent. But I've met other people from Virgin Islands as well who could not do that. Their accent was full time on. They couldn't turn it on, turn it off. I was always curious, like, how did he, and he's not the only one, people be able to do that where they actually can have two different dialects. It turns out I think he spent part of his, younger years in New York City. So that's probably where he got that ability from. Someone else who didn't venture out from the islands probably did not develop that ability to be around other dialects long enough to pick them up and be able to hold on to it. I'm not saying everyone in the Virgin Islands has a strong Caribbean accent. That's not necessarily the case. But more than likely, if that's your environment you're growing up in, you're much more likely to become a product of your environment when it comes to that and how they speak at home versus venturing out, exploring different places, and being exposed to these different dialects. So again, one more example of understanding how certain things is part of who I am and my foundation, but also figuring out how to leverage it in such a way that I'm able to not, to transcend it and not allow it to handicap or limit me from exploring new opportunities in life. All right, we'll leave it there.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
The Whisper of Air. The Whisper of Air is about the clarity of ideas, perspective, and reflection. This is the philosophical aspect of our being when it comes to being more than just a product of your environment. I mentioned, living in Miami, living in New York, living in Atlanta. I probably met some of my long-term best friends in New York, 9th grade, 10th grade. Couple friends I'd known for 10, 15 years, all the way into my mid to late 20s. And because we met at such a young age, we were somewhat juvenile delinquents. We used to skip school, go drink, smoke, do whatever, hook up with girls, go to the mall. Because of some of the role models I had growing up, crime, drugs, hustling, these were just a part of our environment. So when you grow up in these elements, you kind of take it for granted. You assume, a good portion of the world is this way. Yes, you understand morality. Yes, you understand right from wrong, but it's so prevalent in your environment that you don't really think a whole lot about it. Long story short, me joining the Navy, these friends remained in New York. I would come back and forth. So on vacation, holidays, come back, hook up, boom, let's hit the road. We travel, we do things together, we hang out. It's like good old times. So I noticed a gradual shift over the years. For example, again, I got married young. I joined the Navy at 17, got married at 18, had my first kid at 19. My friend, we're probably 25 or so at this point in time. He's had his first kid, and I was starting this label at the time, World's Finest Enterprises. We had a little studio. I would come snatch him up. We'd go, drop some stuff at the studio, work with my cousin Chunk Jules at the time. And my man, he just, I ain't gonna say his name, but he just sitting over there moping, looking sad, looking down, depressed. And I'm like, yo, what's up with you? He's like, nah, And I'm like, man, we came here to record, we want good energy, creativity. And he kind of snapped at me. Oh, I don't need no man do nothing for me. So I'm like, whoa, okay. This went a nasty direction. So I fell back. I said, you know what? I'm gonna let him have this. We did our recording, did what we were supposed to do. On the way out, we heading downstairs, get out the front of the building. And so I pull him to the side. I'm like, yo, I don't know what's going on with you, man, but don't talk to me like that again. You know what I'm saying? Fortunately, he curbed his attitude, his behavior. He's like, my bad, man, wasn't like that. I'm just stressed. I got to come up with diapers and stuff for his son, which I could understand. The problem is you stressing over saying you can't buy diapers. But this same dude, his son had leather jackets. He had gold necklaces, gold bracelets. And his son was like maybe 2 at the time. Again, I'm a father at 19. And I was raising my kid, and it's like my daughter didn't have all that stuff. She had diapers, though. She had formula. She had all basic needs. So what this kind of exposed was a difference of priorities. You can't say I ain't got money for these essentials, but my kid got these non-essentials. You know what I'm saying? And that kind of started a rift. That was a break in mindset and belief of what was important, what was priorities. I wasn't about the show. I ain't saying there's nothing wrong with having leather jackets, gold bracelets and whatnot if you can afford that. But it should not be at the expense of the basic necessities, food on the table, diapers, basic things that kids need. And so we kind of butted heads on that. I can't say for certain, but that kind of started a little bit of a rift. A couple years passed down the road. That friend, as well as another best friend, kind of cut me off, stopped responding to my calls. I didn't know what happened. To this day, I don't know what happened. That relationship just faded to black. I say this to say, I think sometimes God takes people out of your lives for a reason. And you can force your hand to try and keep someone in your life, because I was always a very loyal dude. But sometimes God takes them out your life for a reason, because they might limit or prevent you from growing and becoming the better version of yourself. And had it been on me, because I am a loyal dude, regardless of how we butted heads and had different philosophies on life or approaches, I would have probably remained loyal and kept that person in my life. So I share that to say, when you're talking about the geography of where you're from, you're talking about, the people, the influences, the relationships, the culture, all these other things become part of your identity and how you see yourself. And sometimes things you have to choose to cut out your life. And sometimes things, for whatever reason, are cut out of your life for you. And you have to know sometimes to let them go, because it's probably for the best. So I share that story for you to realize that, hey, not all things are worth holding on to. Some things are simply holding you back, and you have to have the judgment, the discernment, the discrimination, the wisdom to know when to let things go. So that for me is the whisper of air, and it's enhanced when you take time to simply reflect, be quiet, meditate, be alone, and you can better hear God's voice, what you want to call it, intuition, guiding you in a certain direction.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
The Elixir of Ether. The Elixir of Ether is about alignment. It's about listening to our intuition of that inner voice of spirit. It's about being in tune with our higher nature. It's understanding Jesus's words when he says, not my will be done, but thy will be done. When it comes to not allowing our environment to define us, we must realize we are not our egos, our stories, or our narratives. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. You are more than your parents, your schools, or your upbringing. What's most important is understanding the energy you put out is the energy that comes back to you. This is a tricky place to be because most of us are taught to put family above all else. We have a loyalty to our family and traditions. However, there will be times where our family isn't always right. We must have the courage to stand our ground and not acquiesce simply because we love our family, neighborhoods, or communities. We cannot be complicit, and we should speak out when we see things that are wrong. You have to speak power to truth to power, and yet don't become so righteous that you become judgmental in the process. Everyone will not be where you are in life, and we must give people space and time to grow in their own time. In actuality, we are all going to die at some point in time. We don't know when. You may have a long life. You may have a short life. I've seen it all through my years of life. Friends go young and people go before you that you felt should not have gone. And some people live long lives. We don't get to take the place we were with us. Meaning I don't get to take South Bronx with me when I go. I don't get to take Miami, Atlanta, any of the places I've lived when I leave this earth. We come into this world alone and we leave it alone, which is why we should not become overly identified with our upbringing, our environment, and should certainly not become attached to it.
I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
All right, this section is Crown Me, building kings and queens. There are pharaohs all around. So are you ready to be crowned? Crown Me is about taking everything discussed in this episode and not necessarily embracing it all, but at least allowing yourself to exercise open-mindedness, to stimulate critical thinking and allow some consideration. Maybe you need to do your own homework where need be and mold these concepts to fit you where you currently are in your life. So we discuss the idea of not just becoming a product of your environment and how to transcend the upbringing where need be. We discuss how this can benefit you as well as how it can hinder us. We discuss ways to allow ourselves to grow and how to recognize when our upbringings may no longer serve us in all situations. As always, we thank you for listening. Please subscribe and turn on your notifications and share with someone you feel could benefit from this dialogue. I'll see you again soon in our next episode. And know you, by the way, wear your crown.
If you can feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Yo, would you stop?